The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. You know, sometimes you have people on your show and you invite them back because they have so much to add and so much to say about what's going on in our universe, actually. This particular person that I'm going to interview today is Sylvester Boyd Jr., who happens to be an author, an actor, a historian, a motivational speaker, and much more. And he wrote a book which is called The Road from Money. And this book takes place between 1925 and 1937. Now, I'm sure he's going to write a lot of other books, but on the other hand, this one is really interesting. So I want you to take us from the beginning of the book to maybe just the middle and let us know what it's all about.
Okay, Susan, the book starts, like you say, really right around the turn of the century. And it's about my aunt, Estella, who was born in the town of Money, Mississippi. And of course, maybe everybody's not familiar with the historical events that took place in Money, Mississippi. It was the town that Emmett Till was killed in and thrown in the Tallahatchie River, which flows through Money, Mississippi. And it was in the year 1955 that happened. So that's a historical context. But the book setting starts with a train coming into Money, Mississippi on a sort of a overcast day and a locomotive coming through town. And my grandfather, not my grandfather, my great-grandfather, as a matter of fact, on a mule-drawn wagon, because you got to go back to, takes place in the year 1925, so it's a whole different context than anything that happens today. There was more mule-drawn wagons than there are automobiles in Money, Mississippi at that point in time. So that's where the sitting, and then they would go into a country store there, in a potbelly store, with a gentleman sitting around talking, a couple of white men talking and having a conversation. And my aunt goes into the store to order some, well, not my aunt, my grandfather ordered some provisions, because back in those days, they were sharecroppers, and they raised most of their food, but stuff like cornmeal, salt, pepper, and sort of staple things, they had to order from the general store. And under the system of sharecropping, they didn't get paid. Their payment was when they go in and order clothes or anything that they needed, shoes, etc., provisions. That was part of the payment. And then the rent on the shack that they lived in, I wouldn't call it much of a house, but the shack that they lived in, that was paid for by their laborers in the field, in the cotton fields. So they went in to get their staples. And of course, being 1925 in Money, Mississippi, there was a lady that came in the store after them, and she rushed up to the counter because she was in a hurry, and she just acted like they didn't exist. And then my aunt spoke up and said, well, why are you waiting on her before us? And so that's sort of where the story starts at.
You know, I'll tell you something. Years ago, I had a friend who lived in the same area, and her family actually saw Emmett Till be killed. Now, when she told me that story, I couldn't believe it. I mean, why did they want to do this to people who were Black? That is a question that people are always asking. It's like Black Lives Matter. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, America as a country started under the foundations of our country started in a not too nice way. We look at our country today, and people who get credit for doing things, and the country as it stands today, it was built on the backs of minorities. Mexicans, African Americans, the Indians, of course, with the land, they had the land because Indians were here, the American Native Americans were here thousands of years before they ever saw a white face. So those types of things created a situation where free labor, the slave trade was, African Americans, frankly, were brought here to exploit their labor. And the labor made the South of America wouldn't have been near as viable as it was without that labor. And the country, frankly, was built on the backs of the minorities. We look at it as, that's just obliterated from our history. I'm a historian, and that's just obliterated from our history. It's taken out of context. It's not recognized for what it was. Where did the land come from? And so the Indians had the land, the minority, the African Americans had the slave labor. And so there's land and there's labor that's free. So the country was built on that premise, and it was a terrible premise to build on. It was America's original sin. And we're, in a funny sort of way, perverse sort of way, free labor and free land built the country. And then Black people are, through our history, have been sort of vilified for doing it, picking the cotton, for building the White House, which that was built with slave labor. All those things were not given to American as a country to look at and see what the history really was.
I'll tell you something. Many years ago, I went to Fisk University to really interview some of the people who were on the peace walks. Now, here it is, people, and we're talking about maybe the 60s, and here I saw so many people marching, and they were very peaceful, but people were throwing rocks at them. And they said, I will not carry on. I will not do any bad things because I believe in peace. Now, do you think that it's justified today when we see people in the streets fighting, burning down cars, defunding the police and all of that? And you don't think that it, should make a difference if they're Black or white, do you?
No, I don't think that should make a difference, but we don't have honest history. I'm a historian. America was built on all men are created equal, except as all white men, landed gentry. That's what we started out in. If you know the facts about the country, you have a different viewpoint of it. I love America, but does America love me? Does, my ancestors, they loved America, but did America love them? So, and from a Black perspective or Native American perspective, or an Asian American perspective, or Native American perspective, whites have taken advantage of everybody that they've touched. And so that's honesty, and it's pure. And until we look at that and with open eyes and almost repent for some of the things that have been done because they have been abominable, we won't get to where we're supposed to be. We just keep pushing it off and turning it around. And, the political dynamic today is a lot that has sprung from the very beginnings of this country, the very root of the country is where we are today. We've always been a divided America. We have never been a unified country. It has never been a melting pot. That's honesty, and it hurts when you say that. It makes, when you talk about the police, I'm an African American. I'm 78 years old. I've seen a lot of our history. I've studied a lot of our history. And I think a policeman that goes out and puts his badge on every morning and puts his uniform on and goes out into the world is an admirable thing. I don't have anything against police officers. I definitely don't. We need them. They're a must in our society, but there's a big caveat on that. They're not supposed to go out and shoot a young Black person for something they wouldn't shoot a young white person from. And there's no doubt in my mind that if you look at the statistic, African American males are at the top of the list of the people who are shot by policemen. And there must be a racial component to that. It has to be. And that's what I think is despicable.
Yeah. And what about search and seizure? That's a situation that goes on. For example, when people come over the border to New Jersey, if they're Black, they're usually stopped. How do you feel about that?
Well, basically, the whole complex of institutional racism is embedded and ingrained deep within the country. Whites have been taught that, certain groups are inferior, which is a lie. But that's what they taught. And then again, we don't teach history. You can't take one person's history away without taking some of your own history, because history is true. What happened, happened. And now you can tell the truth about it, or you can lie about it. But what happened, happened. So true history will always be, as a historian, that's what I was taught. True history will always be, facts will always be facts. They never lie to you. As far as search and seizure, that's just part of where we started. Policing in America, most people don't know, started from slave patrols. It's always been that the white society, which is the power structure in America, has, number one, feared the minority community. Number two, exploited the minority community. And always the police were sort of the forward vanguard of taking care of making sure that that community stayed within certain parameters. And it's not the same parameters that are given to white people, which they're given white privilege, and everybody else is sort of a country where we say, okay, this is what we stand for, but it's not what we do.
Yeah.
We say all men are created equal, but coming back to that, it started with a conflict, that all men are created equal. But someone said that Black people were 3/4 of a human being. That's to justify the evil, because you knew it was evil, you knew it's wrong. And this is a hard conversation to have. This is the conversation America fears. And it will come to pass that you have to sit down. Something will make it happen that you have to sit down and say, hey, look at what we've done, and it's terrible. But can we, until you sit down and recognize it, you can't sit down to the table of brotherhood and go forward. You will always have riots in the summer. When a young Black male is shot, it should always be, and there should be. If he was shot in a circumstance where a white male wouldn't have been shot, then there should be an uprising. And I'm not saying we should burn things down, but somewhere there has to be a reckoning for the things that are done.
Yeah, but let me ask you something, Sylvester. Usually the situation is that Black people kill Black people. And I don't know why, because it's the same culture. They know that it's wrong, and people just don't understand why that happens. Young people today are in a different situation than they were before. We had for 2 years a crisis in our country where everybody had to stay inside, and maybe they needed to get outside to really get to know that life goes on, and we don't want things like that to happen. What do you say to that? Do you have grandchildren or children who talk about this around the table?
Well, number one, I was a teacher from kindergarten to K. I was certified here in Chicago to do that. So I taught for about 5 years. But getting back to why do we, number one, you have to know history, and we don't. We've probably got an F- in history, most Americans. You say it's the same culture. Africa is one of the biggest continents on the planet. It is also drawn on a map to not represent actually the land size. If you know anything about geography, which I had quite a bit of geography, you could put America and Africa 3 times. Okay, it's one of the biggest continents on the face of the planet. There are 56 countries in Africa. There are hundreds of dialects spoken. There are several different, totally different cultures. So you throw everybody on a slave ship, bring them over here, and they're supposed to be buddies. They were sometimes very warlike toward each other. There are others that are cooperated with one tribe, from the other. But just like you had Indian tribes in America, Native American tribes, you have tribes in Africa. The Zulu, and it goes on. There's a whole lot of names. I'm not going to call them all, but I studied those tribes. So we were never a one unified people. We were unified by color. And even that is In Northern Africa, we're still in Africa when we're in Libya, is at the top of Africa. And those people are sort of a light brown colored. And once you go south of the Sahara, the people are darker. We were never one unified, homogeneous group. We were unified in America only by our skin color. So it's not one, just like you would say, a white person from country in Europe, all the same. They have different cultures, they have different eating patterns, they have different clothing patterns, they live in different environments. So, but we say Black people, okay? We amongst ourselves have never been one monolithic group. So that's knowing history, but you're not taught that. That's where the educational system in You don't teach the things that need to be taught. You need to be taught the world that you live in. I'm a geography major, so definitely I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world. So that's unusual. Not everybody can do that. I've been blessed to do that. But, you see the differences in people, and you learn that everybody is the same in basics. And then we all variations on the same thing. We all are. There's nobody that is not. The other thing is Africa was the mother of all people, whether you're as white as snow or as dark as coal. That is the motherland. That is your motherland. There's variations that took place in our bodies as time went on over the eon, and we all came from Africa. That's a fact. If you ask anybody that knows anything that deals with the structure of where the human family came from, they'll tell you that. That's factual. We're good at denying facts because sometimes facts hurt. And, they're not what you want to see. So we paint a picture that we want to see, and we go merrily along our way. I think education is really abominable. We do not study history. We don't study geography. We don't study. We all a computer. This is a computer age, okay? And I watched that come in, and we can't put a cell phone down for 2 minutes right now. So I'm not saying that's bad. But you don't know what are the oceans of the world, where are the capitals, how do people live? These are your neighbors. Everybody on this planet is a neighbor. Things that happen from one end to the other of the planet because we don't respect. My biggest word in the universe is two words that I go by: love and respect.
That's right. Now, I'm going to stop you now because here's the thing. You talked about education, and there is nothing better than education. Now, our system today is really screwed up. I mean, from this pandemic, many people had to wear masks. Kids from 2 years old had to wear masks. How could they communicate? How could they really learn what is necessary for them to learn? And I'm very curious, do you ever think about writing a book about what's happening now versus what happened in the early days?
Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I'm on my fourth book now. So we're talking about my first book. I'm on my fourth book, which will be out by this fall. Everything we do, we divide ourselves on. Masks to me is a simple thing. People in China and other places have been wearing masks for years, not because of the pandemic, because of the pollution that China encounters. They do a lot of coal burning, and the people are used to wearing masks. I think we should wait till the pandemic dies down. We should quit crying like little babies about wearing a mask that will protect you. Shots will protect you. But I have all my shots, and I'm going to get my fourth shot pretty quick. But here's the thing. We get on an airplane and we fight because the stewardess tell us, keep your mask on. And there's all this upheaval. Number one, I don't think the penalties are severe enough. You get, if you do something in the air that's interstate travel, which is covered by the FBI, you should get a minimum a sentence of 60 days. They give you some time to think about what you've done. You're harming somebody in the air. You're making fear come over the whole flight crew and all the passengers, and because you didn't feel like you wanted to wear a mask. I'm sitting next to a person not wearing a mask. Maybe they got COVID. I don't know. You're not wearing a mask. I'm breathing the same air you are in the same compartment that you are for 2 hours, 3 hours, 9 hours, whatever the flight may take. You have a personal responsibility to take care of yourself, but you also should want to take care of everybody around you. Yeah. So you sit there, you don't wear your mask, and that person next to you gives you whatever it is. You go home and you take it to somebody who is immune compromised. Their immune system is not up. They got the older person, or they're for whatever reason, they're young child. What you're saying is my rights are more important than anybody I come in contact. It's me, 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 me. That's American society today. It's awful. Yeah.
Well, it's the me generation today. There's no question about it. But we're almost at the end of the show, so I'm really interested in having you talk about your books, because that is really your mark. That's what you do, and that's what you do the best. So tell us about the rest of the book that we talked about a moment ago, and what is in store for you for the next book.
Okay, the next book, well, we're talking about my first book, so I've written 3 books already. They're already published. It's called The Road for Money, and then the next couple of books, the story continues, because it's a continuing story. My aunt was 1917, and she died in the year 2009, so that's a long span and my books cover history. They give you a lot of history of, it talks about political dynamics. It talks about the civil rights movement. There's something in it about Dr. King and about Rosa Parks and the stories that we know, but there's stories that we don't know, and how when not in the presence of white people, how Black people talk amongst themselves. You get a chance to get into that inner thought and how we talk, and how white people talk when they think that there's no Black people present. I put the music in there, the music at the time, the 40s, the 50s. My aunt was Rosie the Riveter in the 1940s during World War II. Thought that was very interesting. So what the dynamics that I have is religion, because in the 1940s, my aunt did something that was very unusual. She worked in a defense plant here in Chicago. She met several people from different religious groups, white people, and there was one Spanish lady, and they decided to go to each other's church. Very unusual. So I get deeply into religion, how different religions approach life. And so that's there. The music of the time. If you're in the 40s, you're talking about Take the A Train, the dancing. If you're back where the book starts, they go to a juke joint up in the woods that only Black people knew. Talking about bootlegging. My grandfather was a bootlegger. He actually spent time in the calaboose for bootlegging. That's in the book. The political dynamic of the reverse of the Democratic Party switching from what it was to what it is. The civil rights movement of the people who went to Little Rock High School and were treated abominably because they didn't want to integrate school and sit in a classroom. White people didn't want to sit with the Black people. Mm-hmm. Always been divided on that line. So everything in those books are just what happened in America. I try to give you the history of America, the music of America, the political dynamics of America, and the cultures of America in all the books.
Well, this is really interesting because it's so important for people to understand other cultures. Without that, there's no end to what they can really do or think about, or actually do something bad, or maybe even do something good. Sylvester, people want to know where they can get your books. Can you tell us where they get their books? And is it at places like Barnes & Nobles or Amazon? Tell us where they can get it.
Well, the easiest way to get it, and I usually autograph a lot of books, they come directly to me. It's at boydbooks.net, BOYD books, BOOKS.net, boydbooks.net. And you'll get your book very rapidly because I control my distribution.
Well, again, I want to thank you for being on the Susan Brender Show. I hope that everybody buys your books because no question about it, you cover so many different issues that are so important now, especially now. So thank you, Sylvester, for being on my show.
Thank you for having me.